Hello, and welcome to this month's monthly webinar provided to you by Perry Johnson Laboratory Accreditation. My name is Mike Kramer. I am the Calibration Program Manager at PJLA. And as you can, hopefully everybody's can hear me fine and can see my screen okay. As you can see, today's webinar for September we'll look at the requirements of the current 17025 2005 5.8 handling of test and calibration items. Excuse me. As always, this webinar is being recorded, and it will be available in its entirety on the Perry Johnson Laboratory Accreditation website, www.pjlabs.com. Just go to the link for recorded webinars. I always specify this during these broadcasts that under that link of recorded webinars is quite an array of webinars we've done. I believe they go back to 2012, so they're titled appropriately, so feel free to review what's there, and if there's any topic of interest, you're able to go back and click on the link and listen to the webinar as it was presented at that point in time. This webinar is set for an hour. This is a relatively shorter section of 17025. There's only 4 clauses there, but there's a lot of information within the clauses. I don't foresee this one going quite that long. And as always, those of you that has signed in before, and for those of you that maybe just joining us for the first time today, at the end of each webinar, we will we'll allocate some time for questions. So you'll have a place on your screen that where you can submit questions. Those questions will be funneled back to myself, where I will chime in when we're finished and hopefully go through some good questions and answer them sufficiently. So looking at today's topic, like I said, it's only four clauses, and there's quite a bit of information within the clauses. Currently is section 5.8 within the standard. 5.8.1 centers around transport, receipt, handling, protection, storage, retention, disposal, protection of the integrity and interest of those samples or artifact. It's within the laboratory. 5.8.2 centers around the identification, unique identification for the light of items as to not confuse. Also, if needed, to accommodate subdivisions and also the transfer of items. The third clause centers around departures recorded on receipt, any abnormalities. Where in doubt, consult the customer before proceeding and make a record of it. And the very last clause within 5.8 centers around your facility. You should be able to avoid deterioration, loss, damage, storage, handling, preparation, following any specified handling instructions. Centers around the environmental conditions if needed, which needs to be maintained, monitor, recorded. And finally, it centers around storage, storage security. That should be security issues and protecting the condition and the integrity of the artifacts, perhaps during off hours. So I'm the calibration program manager, but I have been an assessor, and I'm still involved in assessment quite routinely at PJLA. And when I get to this section and of the standard, and I'm in the laboratory, I like to refer to this as front door to back door. And as an assessor, or perhaps even in your case, if you're an internal auditor, this is a process I like the lab to walk me through. So basically, samples or artifacts are coming into your facility. They can come in various ways. Customers can deliver them directly to you. They could come in, you could go out and get them, bring them back. Could be shipped in UPS, FedEx, freighted, various means. Once in the facility, it's received, taken in the lab. It's probably passed around, depending on the size of your organization, to various personnel. Eventually, the package would be taken, opened, inspected, and most of the time, I say in this day and age, computers are used to log in and track information once it's received in the facility. From there, depending on some of this may be applicable, some may not be. Once the items are logged in and in the system, it's going to go somewhere. It may not be tested or calibrated right away. It may have to sit. It may have to be stored in specified conditions until the time it's actually calibrated. Once calibrated, of course, you folks will do what you do best: test samples or calibrate artifacts brought into the lab. Provide your customer reports, and then eventually, depending on what it is, a sample could be disposed of. Calibration would be returned to the customer, so that can be accomplished in various means. So again, I refer to it as front door to back door. However, dealing with calibration, and I know this is applicable quite often with calibration, where work is actually performed on site at the customer's location. There's also applicable sections to this this section 5.8. Even if you are doing the work at the customer's site, you're going to have to be able to hopefully have some sort of traveler on site, identify what's to be tested or calibrated, and as you'll see as we go along, most every part in this section can be crosswalked. The only thing, of course, you're at the mercy of your customer as far as the actual environment in which the testing or calibrations are being undertaken. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to look at each one of these clauses, and then we're going to sort of dissect them in pieces. So 581 currently states the laboratory shall, and again, those of you that have joined us before know when I say a shall, that's a must, that's a requirement. So the laboratory shall have procedures for the transportation, receipt, handling, protection, storage, retention, and or disposal of testing or calibration items, including all provisions necessary to protect the integrity of the test or calibration items and to protect the interest of the laboratory and the customers. And so first thing, the laboratory shall have a procedure. So I define procedures as a set of action that is the official or accepted way of doing something. So again, like I said, there's 4 clauses, but like on here, on this one, 5A1, there's quite a bit of material within each one of these clauses. So looking at 581, laboratory shall have procedures for the transportation, receipt, and handling. So transportation, artifacts could be brought into the lab. Pictured up at the top, the far left, is actually a calibration van. I see often laboratories actually offering a service of picking up artifacts or samples at the customer's facility perhaps bringing them back to the lab. Of course, they could also be bought in via carriers such as UPS, freighted, brought in and shipped out in the same manner. Once within the facility, receipt. Perhaps it goes to a certain area. Normally, I'll see computers involved in here. So this is a receipt of the artifacts and where it is bought in. And last but not least is the handling. Once the samples or artifacts are within the facility, like I said, front door to back door, where from there. Protection, storage, retention, and or disposal. So again, pretty self-explanatory there. Protection, items are brought into your facility. You want to make sure that, of course, they're not in the open. They're protected, perhaps in a location, lock, key, card scanner, depending on the size of your organization, that the items are going to be kept in a safe and secure area of the lab where only those personnel that were involved in the testing and calibration activities would have access to. Storage, of course, things are brought into the lab. May not go right from opening the box to the testing facility. And in most cases, particularly with calibration, it's not a very good practice. They normally have to sit a while and then brought into the lab and equilibrate. So once items are brought into the lab, they're logged in, they're inspected. Where are they kept? Has to be addressed. So then we're looking at once they're in the lab and perhaps been tested, we have retention and or disposal. So I'm looking at this, I'm thinking of a couple things. Retention could be perhaps, I was involved in regulatory samples before when I worked in a state laboratory. And there was specified retention times where we had to keep our samples, portions of our samples, after they were tested. So perhaps this could be applicable to you all, that you maintain portions of the sample. Also thinking about it, retention. I could also interpret that as turnaround. So you may specify different, and I have worked in a facility, different levels of service. Hence, turnaround time within the facility may be specified depending on the type of calibration and what was required by the customer. Hence, that middle picture on the end sort of give an example of that aspect of this particular clause. And finally, other than retention, even if after retention or perhaps you don't need to retain your items, your samples, is disposal. And that could be depending on what it is you're testing, sampling. Could be very rigid and could be a biohazard and had to be disposed of in a strict prescribed manner. Hence, bottom picture on the right is depicting the disposal of samples within the laboratory. And still in 581, and like I said, we're picking this apart, including all provisions necessary to protect the integrity of the test or calibration items and to protect the interest of the laboratory and the customer. Standard customer confidentiality comes up in a few places within the standard, but this is also applicable to Section 5.8 when items are within your facility, your samples, your artifacts that you're calibrating. As between you and your customers, there should be no outside person that could come in and be able to identify whose work is in the facility, what types of tests are going to be done. So hence, during the handling process, that customer confidentiality needs to be maintained. And again, that can be done in various methods. As an assessor, when I see the testing and calibration laboratory, I'd like to see some sort of provisions for entering. For small operations, a sign may be sufficient with front door access only. Larger organizations, seeing them key coded banner, card scanners, but I want to see that outside door not accessible to those folks that aren't involved in the testing and or calibration activities. Okay, that is 5A1. So moving on to the second clause, 5A2, the laboratory shall have a system for identifying test and or calibration items. The identification shall be retained throughout the life of the item in the laboratory. The system shall be designed and operated so as to ensure that items cannot be confused physically or when referred to in records or other documents. The laboratory shall, if appropriate, accommodate a subdivision of groups of items and the transfer of items within and from the laboratory. So this particular clause, as you can see, is primarily dealing with the identification of items that you are testing in or calibrating. Typically with this section as an assessor, I'm looking for some sort of traveler that's kept with, in my case, mostly calibration items that are sitting in the facility, perhaps waiting to be calibrated. So a system of identifying test or calibration items. Calibration, I see them array of methods. Often it could be right on the artifact, i.e. serial number, make, model. Could be a permanent identification, uniquely identifying a particular item. Could be an internally generated item, such as an asset number, customer ID number. Moving on, could actually be for some instances. I was involved in a seed and grain moisture testing facility. Samples would come in, would actually each sample would have a corresponding tag associated with it. So whatever the means, needs to uniquely identify that particular test, that particular sample or artifact. As you can see, far right, water samples, they all look alike. Have to be able to differentiate one from the other. And nowadays, if you notice down there in the far right corner, I was involved in this within the calibration labs. Barcoding. Things may come into your facility. You enter them into the tracking system. There's some sort of barcode that could be applied to the facility. So next time it comes in, basically that barcode is scan it. Hence that unique identification number associated with that barcode would still apply with all that information already pre-populated. Okay, just a simple word of thumb here. The method used for identification of test samples must ensure that the ID method is unique and that the ID tag or other ID method is not likely to come off, resulting in misidentification or confusion with other samples. Hence, got a picture over there, no sticky notes. As you know, they tend to come off, and wouldn't be an appropriate means to label a facility that perhaps have several samples that they could be easily, if these notes or tags come off, could be confused with other samples within the organization. The identification shall be retained throughout the life of the item in the laboratory. The system shall be designed and operated so as to ensure that items cannot be confused physically or when referred to records or other documents. Hence, items trying to the picture down here are two exact same types of calipers. You have to be able to differentiate between one from the other, even if it was the same customer client that submitted these calipers. Each one has to be have some sort of a unique numbering to it, unique identification. The system shall, if appropriate, accommodate a subdivision of groups of items and the transfer of items from within and from the laboratory. So, for example, you could get that, could be a calibration lab. You could be doing test weights. As you know, test weights come in all kinds of shapes, sizes, and classifications, tolerances that are utilized from up to rough weigh and up to high precision analytical type of weights. Hence, you may have subdivisions of various classifications of test weights, depending on the type of calibrations they are going to be undertaken. I mentioned previously I was involved in the seed and grain laboratory testing. Hence, samples would come in, and from that sample, various types of tests would be done. I.e., some would be taken to germination, some would be taken to purity. A part of that sample could even be taken to electrophoresis testing or DNA identification, special type of testing. It specifies items from within or from the laboratory. If you look down at the far left-hand side, that's a weight cart that could actually be coming in with the test weights. That is basically a big weight on wheels where you could put other weights in it. Hence, you have a moving cart. That is a vehicle that could be calibrated. However, that, for example, could be calibrated in another facility, a satellite location. Hence, may be taken away from the rest of the group of the artifacts within that group. Same is sort of correlated down there in the bottom with the seeds. Some may go to a greenhouse, for example. The other parts of the sample will be maintained in the laboratory's analytical section. And then, of course, transport it from within the laboratory. So if you did have a separate, satellite type facility, perhaps how they are actually transported. Also, we mentioned this earlier, perhaps you're actually transporting them back and forth between your facility and the customer's facility. Okay, 583, clause number 3. Upon receipt of the test or calibration items, abnormalities or departures from normal or specified conditions as described in the test or calibration method shall be recorded. When there is doubt as to the suitability of an item for test or calibration, or when an item does not conform to the description provided, or the test or calibration required is not specified in sufficient detail, the laboratory shall consult the customer for further instructions before proceeding and shall record the discussion. Okay, so I'm going to get that for a few and we'll dissect this a little bit. So a lot of this is, I believe, common sense. So upon receipt, abnormalities or departure from normal or specified conditions as described in the test or calibration method shall be recorded. Hence, a recording, that's a record showing you what's been done. So what I'm trying to picture here is some abnormalities that may be common. Packing list, for example. That packing list is supposed to specify what's in that package. Hence, if that packing list is not matching up to what's received, that would be an abnormality. Anything that's damaged should be recorded. Hence, something comes in, you open it up, you see the just in that multimeter over there at the top right, that cracked faceplate. That is something that you would definitely want to make a note of. And of course, the box itself. I've actually gotten boxes in that look like that one at the far right. So you want to make note that that box was received was received in the manner that's depicted below. And good common sense, I know 17025 tells you to do this, but you want to let your customer know, your client, as soon as possible. So whenever there is doubt as to the suitability of an item for tester calibration, or when an item does not conform to the descriptions provided, or your tester calibration required is not sufficient, is not specified in sufficient detail, the laboratory shall consult the customer for further instructions before proceeding, and shall record the discussion. Hence, something comes in, it's damaged, like I know 17025 states it here, but it's good practice just to let that customer know right then, as soon as you get it, not 2 or 3 days down the road. Hey, this has come in, the faceplate is cracked, or hey, you told us on this packing list that there were 10 calipers, 10 pipettes. We've only received 9. So there's the sorts of examples of abnormalities that should be recorded, and I would say brought to the customer's attention as soon as possible. Okay, clause number 4, 584, has to do with your facility. The laboratory shall have procedures and appropriate facilities for avoiding deterioration, loss, or damage to the test or calibration items during storage, handling, and preparation. Handling instructions provided with the items shall be followed. When items have to be stored or conditioned under specified environmental condition, these conditions shall be maintained, monitored, and recorded. Where a test or calibration item or a portion of an item is to be held secure, the laboratory shall have arrangements for storage and security that protect the condition and integrity of the secure items or portions concerned. So basically what we're talking about here is your facility. You're within the confines of your walls of your laboratory where these tests or calibrations are being undertaken. And as an assessor, these are things that I'll notice you as an internal auditor, and I'm sort of trying to depict here, i.e. you should have the appropriate facilities, i.e. the picture on the far left, the outside conditions should not be introduced inside. Should have appropriate facilities for avoiding deterioration, loss or damage to the test or calibration items during storage, handling, and preparation. Hence that middle picture there. Hence you can have the best identification record on mine, but if you're not organized and clutter such as I'm sort of overemphasizing there in the middle, as an auditor or an assessor, I would not be surprised if items, samples, or things being sent to the customer could possibly be misplaced or lost. And of course, you want to keep them out of harm's way. So, i.e., you want to make sure that perhaps you're a lab within another facility that is doing manufacturing. You want to keep your calibration artifacts or testing samples out of harm's way. And of course, any specific special instructions that you're receiving from your customer as far as the handling of the test or calibration items you receive, that they're to be followed. So there's a sort of a simple example there of how a particular package or an item is to be held. All right, we're talking about the ambient conditions here, ambient conditions of your laboratory. So when items have to be stored or conditioned under specified environmental conditions, these conditions shall be maintained, monitored, and recorded. Hence, in the calibration world, may specify calibrations are to be taken place at 20 degrees C, for example, plus or minus 2 degrees C, with no more than a half a degree C, that's degrees Celsius per hour. This is an example of what I'm referring to here. On the testing end, I mentioned grain samples that were used to test, in this particular instance, moisture meters. Hence, the moisture content was critical. So if grain samples were kept stored within the facility, there were set parameters as far as the humidity that needed to be maintained. Of course, this is not just during testing. These could pertain to when the artifacts or samples are sitting in your lab waiting to be tested or calibrated, that these particular conditions need to be maintained. So you could monitor it in various ways. Well, I want to say I still see them used quite often. Chart recorders over there. The one on the left is monitoring temperature and humidity. On the right there is a temperature data logger. Nowadays, you can actually download the monitoring right into the computer and be able to see if your prescribed laboratory conditions are being maintained. Okay, very last part of clause 4 within the standard. When a test or calibration item or portion of an item is to be held secure, the laboratory shall have arrangements for storage and security that protects the condition and protects the condition and integrity of the secure items or portions concerned. Hence, samples, artifacts, going to be maintained in the lab. Lab's not manned 24 hours a day. Maybe there for a week or so. This is basically, it's common sense as well. Those items are going to be held secured. Any needed security measures should be put in place. So again, depending on the size of your organization and the traffic that comes and goes throughout the organization, you could have a 24/7 operation. The cal lab or testing lab could only be held open part of that time base. That you want to make sure when the facility is not manned, that of course the samples and artifacts that are being calibrated are being protected and secured, and of course the confidentiality is going to be maintained. Okay, that is the requirements under 17025/2005. As you may or may not know, the standard is looking at going through a revision, and it looks like it's going to happen either toward the tail end of this year or within the first quarter of next year. So with all my webinars, of course, I want to wait until the next revised copy of 17025 is official before we start going over those requirements when they are actually requirements. But I do have the latest committee draft and what's being looked at. So with each of my webinars this year, I like to take a look at that, look at the section that I've been just presented, in this case, section 5.8, handling of testing calibration items, and look at the the draft and see if there's any significant changes. So basically what I can state here as far as section 5.8 is everything that I have gone over with the current version of 17025 is intact in the latest committee draft. I did see one addition, which I really didn't see addressed in the material that we just went over. One significant change, well, but it's going to be for all the sections within the standard, is the numbering system. Hence, the handling of calibration items will not be 5.8, it will come under section 7.4. And a particular clause I saw a slight deviation from is 7.4.3. I'll read the entirely. And you see I bolded something down there at the tail end of this requirement that I really didn't see captured previously. So upon receipt of the tester calibration items, deviations from specified conditions shall be recorded. When there is doubt about the suitability of an item for tester calibration, or when an item does not conform to the descriptions provided, the laboratory shall consult the customer for further instruction before proceeding and shall record results of this consultation. Sort of went over that. Still intact. However, when the customer requires the item to be tested or calibrated, acknowledging a deviation from specified condition, the laboratory shall include a disclaimer in the report indicating which results may have been affected by the deviation. Hence, what that is stating is there in the way I'm interpreting this requirement. I gave you the example of, for instance, the lab is going to be maintained temperature between 20 degrees C plus or minus 2 degrees C. Then that may be the prescribed means for calibrating a specific artifact. Hence, if a laboratory is unable to maintain those conditions, however the customer would like the laboratory to proceed, then the fact that this was done would need to be actually noted on the final product you give your client, which would be your calibration or test report. Okay. I think that brings us to the end of the presentation portion. So again, thank you for signing in today. I hope you found this information presented in an informative manner. Again, as I specified in the beginning, I'm going to provide an opportunity if you have any questions about the material that we provide that I just went over. So I'll give it about 5 minutes, then I'll chime back in. As I specified at the beginning of the presentation, there should be a place on your screen for you to submit questions. If you could just, submit your questions via that format, they will be funneled onto myself. And like I said, about 5 more minutes, we'll see what questions we have. Okay, welcome back. Have a few questions. Like I said, going throughout this presentation, that a lot of these, the standard says that you shall do them, but even if you weren't an accredited facility, it makes good business sense as far as these requirements we went over. Right, move on. Just want to present this. Our next webinar we have it scheduled for October 10th, and it has to do with the requirements of subcontracting, and these will be within the that should be 25. My apologies. ISO IEC 17025 to 2005. Subcontracting. There's a whole clause specific to subcontracting, and it does pop up in various other parts of the standard. One section in particularly reporting the results, their specific requirements. Also, we address subcontracting in SOP 3, and that's our PJLA, our policy and requirements regarding accreditation language and usage of the PJLA symbol. So, got a couple questions here. One question is not really pertaining to the topic. How can we obtain a copy of 17025 2017 standard? It's not an official standard yet, so once it is a standard, you can go right to the I believe it's ISO.org and find it. But if memory serves me correct, I don't have the information in front of me. I mentioned at the beginning our past webinars are recorded. I did one, I would say during the first quarter based on the last committee draft at that time. And that is available on our website under past webinars, recorded webinars. It's entitled Changes to ISO 17025. Where at that time, and there really hasn't been much, if any, movement at that time until now, I go over all the significant changes within that committee draft. So if you're interested in what to be looked at coming down the road, then go to that past webinar. And I believe you could receive the committee draft at ISO.org, and within the presentation, I believe there is the web address there. Okay, so back to the questions. Should there be a specific form for recording abnormalities in the test samples, and are there any specific details that need to be recorded? The standard does not specify any form, just that they need to be recorded. So typically comment section, if you when items come in, or any sort of traveler should be recorded. Of course, any conversation that you have directly with the customer should be recorded. So what should be recorded? If you recall, I had some pictures depicting some things. Damage, a packing list, not agreeing with the contents, the artifact being damaged. Of course, that should be recorded. If there's anything that you feel would jeopardize the integrity of the test or calibration that's to be undertaking pending those reviews, that should be recorded. So anything that you think is going to adversely affect your test results or your calibration results should be tested. No, there is no specific form, but you have to have a procedure. So it's required by 5A1 for the handling of calibration and test items. So I would say what you state in your procedure is what you shall be using. So Okay, let's see here. Okay, it looks like that's about it. There's one here about I need to know. It's not pertaining to this presentation at all. I need to be a metrology certified technician. If you're not a certified technician now, i.e., perhaps like military, for example, they offer something called PMAL. Um, uh, I would refer you to ASQ, the American Society for Quality. They have some certification programs that may be an area that you want to look into. Let me double check here, make sure that I have any more questions. That's about it. So again, apologize for, notice 2 typos on this very last screen. It's not 2917, believe it or not, it's 2017. And according to the standard, it's 17025 still. So again, thank you for signing in. I appreciate it. I hope you found this information informative. Again, if you are interested in what's coming down the pike, it seems to be even that webinar I was referring to. I had by far the most attendees on that specific webinar than any others that I've had since I've been doing these at PJLA, which is going on 2 years now. Time flies. I'm telling you, 2 years I've been doing this. So go back and review that webinar. Like I said, it's in its entirety, and I believe at the very first part of there, but I believe you can get the latest committee draft through ISO.org. So again, thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.